Chapter 4 is called Sin and Society, and it's one of 3 chapters on sin at this point in the book. And I guess you might ask, well, why 3 whole chapters on sin? I suppose because it's fundamental for our grasp of what the Bible is doing, and I'm trying to tell the biblical storyline and indicate ways in which the turning points of the biblical storyline are significant. And if we don't get our heads around what the Bible thinks sin is in a deep way, then all the effort that God goes to deal with sin and its consequences are going to seem strange to us, and the rest of the Bible is going to seem quite superficial. So that's one reason. But also, I think it's really key for us to get a good, deep biblical grasp of what sin is and judgment, because every social movement, every politics, every social theory has its own implicit or explicit sense of the problems out there in the world that need solving. And unless we've got a good sense of what the Bible thinks the problem is, we're going to find it hard to engage on a biblical footing with other ways of construing what's wrong with the world and what's wrong with humans and how that can be put right. So in this chapter, I focus on the social aspect of sin, and I say that while sin, of course, is bad, and it would be much better if we didn't sin, and it took the death of the Son of God to rescue us from sin. Okay, so sin is bad. Nevertheless, in society, it provides certain benefits, not sin in itself, but the consequences of it. Let me explain what I mean, because I feel as though I'm digging a hole for myself as I try and explain this more and more. Equality, for example. So sin puts everyone on the same footing. Dante has popes in hell. Even if you're a pope and you sin, you will die. And so sin undercuts the hierarchies that we try and make in the world. Everybody is on the same footing before God. Job says, doesn't he? Naked I came from my mother's womb, naked I will return. That sin is a great leveler. You can't get out of it with money, you can't get out of it with intellect, you can't get out of it with empathy. Everybody sins, it puts everyone on the same level. And that is socially helpful because it breaks down and undermines the sort of hierarchies that we build up that are really damaging for society. And sin is also a great fuel for democracy, as C.S. Lewis says. He says something like, I'm a Democrat not because I believe that people are wonderful and can rule the world perfectly, but precisely because of sin, that I wouldn't trust anyone with all the power in their own hands. And democracy is a good way, says Lewis, of spreading power around. So sin is a good foundation for democracy. So there are senses in which the sinfulness of all human beings brings certain social benefits in the present age in a way that doesn't mean that sin in itself is good. And then the second thing that I try and do in this chapter is reflect on the way in which the Bible casts everybody without exception as sinful, and particularly seems to make a point of underlining the sinfulness of its great quote-unquote heroes. So Moses, for example, striking the rock in a way that causes God to rebuke him. Abraham with Sarah, incredibly selfish behavior. David, the adulterer and the murderer. Peter, who in that favourite illustration during sermons, Peter only ever takes one foot out of his mouth to put the other in. Everybody apart from the Lord Jesus Christ in the Bible is pretty messed up. And I think this presents a paradigm that is significantly different to the one that prevails in contemporary culture, which is that there are certain groups within society that are fundamentally virtuous, and there are certain groups within society that are fundamentally malevolent. Or sometimes it's put in the terms of there are victims and there are oppressors by virtue of the group to which they belong. Now, of course, there's a truth in there, and that there's a collective weight of the past that is borne by certain groups. And I think in the book of Daniel, this comes out very clearly in the way that Daniel laments for the sins of his nation that are not his own. There is a corporate responsibility, absolutely. But I think what we risk losing when we have that very strong sense of victims and oppressors, is what I call in the book the internal fault line. So the fault line between good and evil doesn't fundamentally run between different groups in society. It runs down the middle of all of us. And we've all got something of the Davids, something of the adulterer, something of the murderer. We've all got something of the Moseses, something of the Abrahams in us. And that allows Christians, I think, to go out into society with a particular sense, first of all, of our own fallibility and an instinctive revulsion to putting ourselves upon a pedestal or to drawing the line between ourselves and anyone else. So it gives us a humility. And it also gives us a position from which to critique dominant cultural narratives of our own day, not completely to destroy them, but to remake them from the inside so that they're radically different, I think.